way than we see right now.
All right. All right. Here we are. Mark Sisson, this has been a long time coming. I don't know.
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember. I believe we met at a Paleo FX conference back in, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something. And you and I,
2016, 2000, something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And we briefly spoke about getting you on my podcast. And I think at the time you were living in Malibu and I was living in Topanga, and we were going to get together and do
Yeah.
it in person. And your schedule and my schedule just never lined up. And then you moved away and then I moved away. So here we are on
That's
Zoom.
it. That's right. I'm in Miami Beach. You're in, where are you now?
I'm in a very small, very strange little town in Colorado called Crestone. It's uh-oh, froze up. Oh, okay, you're back. Your image froze there for a while. Now I'm not hearing you.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Okay, yeah, now you're back.
Okay. That was weird. That was like 20 seconds of dead air. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see what happens. I can always edit stuff out.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I'm in Crestone, Colorado, which is like a little slice of Tibet in Colorado. There's a lot of Buddhists here, Tibetan
Yeah.
stupas. It's the only place in North America that has a permit to conduct open air cremations. So when a local resident dies, they haul them out to the pyre in the desert and burn them at dawn.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting
Wow.
place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Sounds like it.
listen, I really wanted to get you on to talk about this book because this book resonates with me. Even when I just read the sort of summary of the book, I was so happy to see it because I feel like the American health world, of which you're a leader and have been for a long time, from my perspective, is self-destructive because in the US, we have a tendency to do everything too hard, no pain, no gain. You got to push your limits. You got to push through to the other side. And my perspective has always been the body feedback, our feedback systems are here to protect us and to help us. So pleasure is not something to be ashamed of. Pleasure is a guide to health. And so when I read the summary of your book, Born to Walk, I was so happy to see someone advocating for moderation and pleasure and happiness. And I have to say, I really admire you for doing it because I know you spent a lot of your life as a competitive athlete, training to your extremes, pushing your boundaries. And one of the hardest things to do is to moderate one's lifelong perspective and say, wait a minute, maybe I was doing that wrong. Let me revise this. So thank you for doing that. And I just want to really acknowledge the courage it takes to do something like that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm not sure how much courage had to do with it. It was literally the reality of the situation. I mean, I spent a sad realization for me that it may be that I put off some of the more pleasurable moments of my life in pursuit of goals that were goals that I had set for myself. I don't know where they came from, but so I kind of rededicated my focus for the rest of my life into finding ways to be lean and fit and happy and healthy and productive with the least amount of pain and suffering and sacrifice and discipline and calorie counting and portion control. And that's really what directed the next several decades of my writing and my research was looking at these hidden genetic switches that we all have that we can manipulate through certain behavioral choices that we make. And quite often they have more to do with seeking pleasure, like in terms of serotonin versus dopamine, something as simple as that. And it turned out that walking was was one of those themes that throughout our history as a species, walking is something we've always done. It is pleasurable for us, otherwise we wouldn't do it. Our bodies expect us to walk. Our bodies expect us to be moving constantly throughout the day. And our lymphatic system requires that we move constantly to force toxins out of our systems. And all of these um, things pointed toward walking being like the lowest hanging fruit of the longevity track, for
Mm.
instance. Like if you do nothing else but walk a lot, you forget all the devices and all the hacks and all the shit that you're engaging in to extract another 3 months at the end of your life. Walking is something you can do today that's pleasurable, that's meaningful, and that has long-lasting results. And so that it became kind of the focus of this particular book.
Do you find yourself getting frustrated with being in the position of advocating something as commonsensical as walking, but in a society that is designed against these commonsensical, like I lived in Barcelona for 20 years, and every time I'm in Spain, I lose weight. Not because I'm going to a
It's a
gym.
walking city, man.
You walk.
Yeah,
Exactly. I'm going to have a beer with a buddy. I
yeah,
walk because it's beautiful. There are beautiful women
yeah,
everywhere. There are cafes. The architecture is amazing.
yeah,
It's a really nice place to walk. I'd rather walk than take a taxi or a bus. But then I'm
yeah.
in the US, and you don't walk to the mall to, go buy whatever you got to buy. Most cities it's impossible to walk. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
in our evolutionary context, what you're saying makes perfect sense. But for someone living in Phoenix, how are they going to walk? It must be frustrating.
Well, it is. On the other hand, I've taken a look at the results of the current protocols that people are engaging in to achieve fitness, and a lot of them are fairly destructive. Whether it's
Hmm.
just the pursuit of marathon excellence, training for a marathon. Everybody's got to get that as a bucket list item, or training for a 10K or a triathlon, or signing up for these classes, these high intensity classes 4 times a week, 5 times a week, Orange Theory, Barry's Boot Camp, Soul Cycle. I mean, they're all great modalities, but there's a tendency to look at them as sort of the secret. Like, this is the latest discovery. We've discovered that if you really bust your ass training for a marathon, you will be conferred, lifelong health and live a longer life. And it's not true. I mean, the data does not bear that out. And then I've met a lot of people over the last several decades who've gotten burned out doing the high intensity classes, and at the end of the day, all these people are seeking is they want to look good naked, and they want to feel better. And maybe they want to live longer, but they'd like to get better results without so much of the pain and the sweating and struggling and all the stuff that they think they have to do, they have to endure in order to achieve those goals. So what I looked at with regard to human performance is, what is the minimum effective dose of these types of exercises that will confer excellent health, robust fitness to a certain extent. I mean, we're not talking about world-class stuff, and decrease my chances of getting a disease of lifestyle, cancer, heart disease, metabolic diseases. What is the minimum effective dose of exercise, for instance? And it's not much. That's the great irony here, is that walking a lot, which we'll talk about how you incorporate that in Phoenix, but walking a lot, going to the gym twice a week and lifting weights, and then finding some way to sprint to ramp up your heart rate pretty high for a few seconds several times in one workout once a week. That's the minimum effective dose of exercise that will get most people to 85% of their guaranteed max output. And then from there, if you want to compete, if you want to, be get that extra loss of 2% body fat, or that extra two extra pounds of muscle, I can show you how to do that. But the minimum effective dose isn't that much. Now, some of this reverts back to my original books, which was on establishing metabolic flexibility. Long ago, we realized that 80% of your body composition, the amount of you that is fat versus muscle, is determined by how you eat. So I've written 6 books on how to eat right, right? How to develop metabolic flexibility. And once you've done that, once you've developed metabolic flexibility, once you've developed the ability to burn your own stored body fat whenever your body needs energy, whether you've eaten or not, once you've developed metabolic flexibility, you don't need to do that much exercise to maintain a fit, toned body. That's really the secret. So it's the minimum effective dose of food. It's, 120 grams of protein a day, all the vegetables that you can, consume with gusto, a little bit of fruits and some starchy tubers. What's the minimum effective dose of exercise? And then get on and enjoy the rest of your life and hang out with your kids and hang out with your spouse and
Yeah.
join your friends and go to your parties and do whatever you're going to do. But don't. So many people agonize over, oh my God, there's so much work to do to get fit. And the answer, and really the solution is it's not that much. You just have to know, how to orchestrate it, how to put it all together. And that's really what's behind this book, Born to Walk.
Yeah. You remind me of a good friend of mine, a guy named Lloyd Kahn. He's 90, just turned 90, and he skateboards, he surfs, he's got a mountain bike, electric assist mountain bike. He rides all over the place. He's super active guy. He's an amazing, wonderful guy. You remember the Whole Earth catalog?
Horace
All
Stewart
right.
Brand, yeah.
Yeah. So he's old friend of Stuart Brand's, and Lloyd was the shelter editor of the Whole Earth catalog.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
years, he was known as the dome guy because he published a book about building domes, and he went all over the world building domes. And then he got to a certain point in life where he was like, these domes are leaking all the time. They're a real pain in the ass to build. All these calculations have to be perfect. I'm actually not so much into domes anymore, even though he was the dome guru of the world.
The dome guy, yeah. Yeah.
And so I was talking to him recently because, one of the things about Crestone is there's no building code. So all these alternative builders come here and they build domes and yurts, and, everybody's living in all these straw bale houses and all these interesting construction. Anyway, I was talking to Lloyd, and I was like, Lloyd, we want to build a house. What do you think? Should we do this or do that? And he said, you know what, man? Do you want to make a piece of art, or do you want a place to live in? And he's like, just
Yeah.
build it with 2x4s like everybody else, and then have fun,
Yeah.
like have fun in the space, live in the space. Otherwise, you spend your whole life trying to build some amazing place you never get to enjoy. Do you
It's a
think?
great metaphor for the physical body.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what you were just saying was like, it doesn't take that
Yeah.
much, right?
Yeah.
The myth is
Yeah.
that it takes so much work. Now, do you think, where does this myth come from? Where does this idea that fitness has to be, the road to fitness is arduous and long and unforgiving? And is this Judeo-Christian sort of Protestant work ethic stuff, or is
Interesting.
it
Yeah, no,
commercialism?
that's a great. No, it's those and more, but those are two good starting places. I grew up in Maine, so I have that original Puritan work ethic, which has served me well in business. And it served me well as an ascetic, as a stoic, as a runner, as somebody who was into the pain cave, managing discomfort. Like every one of the workouts I ever did as a runner was just managing discomfort. There was no point in the 20 years that I competed where I could go on a workout and say, "Oh my God, this is so much fun. Like this is great." The best I could do was, "All right, I'm in the zone. I'm not feeling too much pain. I'm moving fluidly. Nothing hurts. This is cool." But it was never like, my friends who were playing volleyball or ultimate frisbee or basketball going, "Dude, we got next. We're having so much fun here doing this." So the Puritan work ethic. Okay, then we go back to again Judeo-Christian precepts. We talk about the evolution of humans and civilization, and as we got to become into the 1960s and 70s, which was really about the change in society. And then that shifted into the me generation, which was in the 70s and 80s. And the me generation became more focused on, okay, enough about the altruism in my life and stopping wars across halfway around the world. What can I do for me? And there was Ken Cooper wrote a book in 1968 called Aerobics,
Mm.
and he was a doctor who posited that the more high-end aerobic work you did, cardiovascular work you did, the stronger your heart would be and the longer you would live. And so that put a lot of people on a path of like, okay, I have to go out and do this cardiovascular exercise, and running seems to be accessible to everyone. So people started running. Until that time, the only people who ran were runners, were people
Right.
who self-selected to be runners because they were skinny, they had great lung capacity, they had a great capacity, pain tolerance, they had probably a genetically high VO2 max. And so when I started running in the 60s, uh, I raced. The only people I raced against in races with a lot of people were other runners. There were no overweight people who were entering a marathon to try and lose weight. That was ridiculous. That came along as Jim Fixx wrote a book, The Book of Running, and in it he had his own personal story was he had been a drug addict, and so he had shifted his addiction away from hardcore drugs and cigarettes to running. Actually, he still
Mm.
smoked as a runner, but and so that I think resonated with a lot of people. Like, okay, this is a way of proving myself to myself. This is a way of exercising my demons, exor and exercising my
Mm.
demons.
Yeah.
This is a way to you know to achieve the sort of fitness that Dr. Cooper talked about in the book Aerobics. And it became a self-perpetuating event. The magazine Runner's World came out. Bob Anderson started this magazine, and so running became a thing. It became a thing, and it there was a time in the late 70s, early 80s when there were 20 or 50 million people who were calling themselves runners, enabled by a brand new type of shoe that had thick cushioning on the bottom. Until then, the only people who could run were those skinny, self-selected ectomorphs who had good running form because the shoes were so thin. You couldn't be an overweight person and be plodding along on your heels and have it be beneficial to you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a great, really good question. Like, where does this come from, and how did we develop this notion that more is better? I mean, in those days, I was a runner who trained 100 miles a week, sometimes 130 miles a week, with the understanding that the more I ran, the faster I'd be, and the more resilient I'd be, and the better I'd be as a racer. And it's not necessarily true. It just was the thought process was no pain, no gain, more is better. Probably the same time that bodybuilding was arising,
Mm.
as the countermeasure to the skinny marathon trainer. It was the mesomorphic weightlifting bodybuilder who really, that's the Arnold Schwarzenegger thing, no pain, no gain. You got to go all the way. You got to break down the muscle tissue to build it up better. So all these mantras became part of the fitness ethos. And then we have the aerobics classes that started in the 80s, and the women would to jump to the and men, but mostly women would be jumping up and down and doing all their exercises to the music, and then they'd be scrambling to go to do 2 or 3 classes a day because one wasn't enough. And then along comes spinning and Soul Cycle and Barry's Boot Camp, and everybody's trying to one up the
Yeah.
other in terms of ours is, a more effective form of torture in less time. Right. And you do it in a group session, so everybody's sharing
Yeah.
the pain.
Do you know the
So
origin story of the treadmill?
I don't. Tell me the one you know.
Well, it's perfect. It's perfect to what you're talking
Oh,
about
it was
right
like a
now.
punishment, right? It was a
Yeah.
punishment
It was
for prison. Yeah,
exactly. It was a torture device. Exactly. And now we pay money to put it in our own offices.
that's
Um,
right. That's
you
right.
you remind me of I used to teach English to doctors in Spain, and I had a doctor who he and I became friends, Dr. Rubio. He was an oncologist. Um, and he had no interest in learning English. He just figured I'd come in twice a week, and he could lock his office door, and nobody would bother him for 2 hours, and the hospital would pay for
Yeah.
everything. And so it was a way for him to take a break. And he would open his window in the office and light up a cigarette. So I'd sit there speaking in Spanish generally, because he was like, nah, just
Yeah.
talk to
Yeah.
me in Spanish. Anyway, I
Yeah.
remember we were talking about American society one day, and he said, Chris, the thing about your country, your culture, is Americans have no sense of the ridiculous. He said, that's why you
That's
have
great.
you have Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix could never be Spanish. There's no Spanish Jimi Hendrix, right? You would play
Yeah.
according to the tradition. You wouldn't restring the guitar backwards and play with your tongue. He said, but that's also why you
Yeah.
have such idiocy over there, because people have no sense of common sense, right? There's no sort of guidelines. And I think about that so much living here now after 20 years in Spain. um, in addition to the things we're talking about, the sort of capitalist impetus, there's money to be made in aerobics and running shoes and all this stuff,
Sure. Yeah.
a lot of money. um, I also think there's isn't part of American society is a failure to acknowledge death. Right. Even we see it now in Silicon Valley. There's billions of dollars being put into this idea that, we're going to vanquish death. We can live forever, either by uploading our brains or by taking, 500 vitamin pills a day or whatever. Do you, do you sense that in your work, in your career? Is that part of the impetus of this?
Yeah. I mean, that's so the classic iteration of this is Brian Johnson, whose motto for his company is "Don't die."
Right.
Please. Seriously, I mean, that is, I mean, it was bad enough. Dave Asprey, who's a friend. Dave wants to live to 160,
Uh-huh.
and all of these biohackers are looking for ways they can add, 2 months on this with this device and 3 months with that device to the end of their lives without really paying that much attention to what's going on right now in the moment. And it seems to me, it sounds to me like Crestone is the place where it's really a Zen, like this is the
Yeah.
moment. This is where we're living. There is no future and there is no past. It is now.
Yeah.
And you're not getting this from a lot of these people. And with regard to avoiding death, I mean, I had my first T-shirt said that was my company T-shirt said "Live long, drop dead," and it was it's basically I want you to live. I want you to like live, meaning enjoy your life.
Right.
So when we talk about the longevity movement right now and how people are trying to live longer, it means nothing to me if I'm going to live longer but not have a quality of life. I mean, the quality of life I define as mobility. Like, am I going to be able to walk around and visit people and see people and travel and just get out in nature and experience the sensations of nature? So mobility, mostly walking, and cognition, access to memories and thoughts and things like that. Without those two things, I don't care how long I live. It's like
Yeah.
this is what gives meaning to life. And ultimately, this is, as an atheist, people go, oh, like, what do you think happens when you die? I'm like, remember what it was like before you were born? It's probably just like that. And meanwhile, it is the finality of life that gives the absolute meaning to what I do today. Like, okay, it's knowing that there's a finiteness to it that makes every day magical and impactful and worth living.
Yeah.
So there's a mindset in some of these longevity pursuant cult-like communities that I just don't agree with. And I think you're missing the point, which is like Brian Johnson, who is the tech guy whose motto is "Don't die." And he's got a company called Blueprint now, and like he spends his whole day doing his protocol. And my protocol would be, okay, what can I do that's fun today? What can I go, go swim in the ocean, which is right out my back door here, or do a workout, or ride my fat bike on the beach, or stand up paddle. What am I going to do today that's not part of my protocol, but it is part of my protocol because it's part of my wanting to have fun and move around a lot all day
Yeah.
long.
Well, there's definitely a quality quantity tension, right? Yeah, I feel like a lot
Yeah.
of this American industrial, the health industry complex is all about longer life, not better life. And there's I remember when I was living in Spain, I 4 or 5, when was it? Early, probably 20 years ago now. I was going to say 4 or 5 years ago, but then I think about it, it's like, no, that was 20 years ago. Shit. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, I read like the World Health Report. Every year they come out with the highest longevity around the world. It's generally Japan, but that year it was Spain, and it was
Hmm.
interesting because the report I read said that the researchers were confused because Spain had the highest longevity rates for that year, but they also had very high rates of alcohol and tobacco use. And the researchers are
Yeah.
like, we don't know how it happened. And I remember thinking, well,
Yeah.
it happened. It's like the French paradox, right? Like, oh, high fat
Yeah.
but low
Yeah.
heart disease. How could that possibly happen? And to me, the obvious answer is people enjoy their lives. And so,
Yeah.
a good party lasts longer than a bad party, right? Nobody wants to
Right.
leave. Everyone's having a good time.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, a lot of these things are tangentially stress mitigation more than anything else, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
I enjoy a glass or two of wine every night, and it's a nice way to, take the edge off. Yeah, it's part of my evening meal, and it's part of the ritual of dinner for me. But it also just takes a little bit of the edge off, and I would argue that, I'm someone who doesn't deal that well with stress. So if on balance, if taking in this intoxicant, and I've never been drunk. I've been married for 37 years. My wife will brag that she's never seen me tipsy. But it's just enough to, to take that edge off. So I think in some of these countries where they're, partying or even smoking a cigar, at the end of the day, if that is all blended in Spain being a walking country, in addition to just Barcelona, if it's all blended together, how can you tease out one or two things that are,
Right.
proving that's the cause of the longevity?
Right. Yeah, I have a friend whose mother was in her late 90s, I believe. And her mother would have a glass of scotch at the end of the day. And I was hanging out with my friend, and she was very concerned. She really loved her mother, and she was very concerned. She's like, I just have to get her to stop drinking that scotch. And I said to my friend, she's 94 years old. It works
Yeah,
for her. Why would you want to take that
it
away
totally
from
works.
her?
There are cases where if you took that away, the end would be accelerated, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah,
Because it's part of the ritual, the routine. I think one of the things that I haven't really written a lot about, but I think a lot about is how much of my life is routine, and I crave that routine. I seek that routine.
mm,
And that may be temperament. That some people are different, but in my case, I travel a lot, and I can't wait to get back to my routine at home, right? And
right.
everything's sort of done in the way it's done. And so I think somebody who lives in Sardinia or one of the other blue zone areas and lives into their 90s, part of that routine, if it includes half a stogie or half of or a sip of scotch every night, if you take that routine away, I think you start to impact part of what's going on in the psyche there, and it's not necessarily a positive thing.
Yeah. So how do you apply this principle of moderation that you're talking about in this book? How do you apply this to the rest of your life? Because you're obviously a real go-getter in terms of business. You know, you don't need to be writing books at this point in your career. You don't need new income streams and all that. Like,
Yeah,
how do
yeah.
you fit those things together?
And part of that, but let's go back to routine. Part of that is that when I sold my food company, that routine went away. I didn't have that anymore, and I tried to be retired, and retirement didn't work for me. Uh, I so I started a new company, and I have this new shoe company, and I started with my son. He's my co-founder. It's called Paluva, and that kind of replaced that. That's the part of the routine in my life, and I don't work hard at it. I mean, I have employees and I have people who do the hard lifting, and so I get to be the thought leader and the idea guy and the check writer. Let's be clear on that. Uh, but it's all, that's easy. I mean, it's easy to write checks. And so I get to participate in another very exciting growing business
Mm,
with my son, and not be burdened with, it's like work for me has never been that much to interfere with the rest of my life. And I've in several of my podcasts and similar books, I've talked about this, but I wasn't an 80-hour a week entrepreneur. I mean, I coached little league, I refed soccer, I went to every practice, I went to every game. I was able to run businesses for 30 years, almost 40 years now, with kids, with a wife, and a life. And what does that look like to other people? I mean, I don't play golf, so I didn't disappear for 7 hours on Saturday. So I had not that I gave that up, but that's something that other men and other people would say, okay, this is more important to me. My son, for instance, my son, who does not have children, has a group of guys that he plays golf with every weekend, and it's part of his ritual and part of his routine. And I love that. But getting back to the business side of things, I worked out of my house, so I never stayed late at the office. So I never really, don't tell anybody, I never really worked that hard. I just worked smart, and I worked diligently, and I was fully invested in what I was doing, but I wasn't bragging about putting in 80 hours a week or 90 hours a week because I'm an entrepreneur and that's what it takes.
right.
So now I'm just following the same pattern. It's still part of my routine. I'm working as much as I want to work, and when I don't want to work, I call somebody else up at the company with 10 employees now. And like, either I'm taking this time off, or can you find somebody to take on this task? It's pretty easy once you get the systems in place.
Yeah. Well, you seem to have a lot of just like a high natural energy level. Is that accurate? Like, have you always been like an active, like you're not comfortable just hanging out, perusing
No,
magazines?
no, here's the thing. I have two settings, and one of them that's most often in operation is the low energy mode. So I'm a very low key guy. Most people who know me would say I'm low key,
Hmm.
but I fire up for conversations with people like you, Chris, and I fire up for podcasts, and I get on stage and if I'm on, I'm on, and I
Uh,
know how to do that.
I
And part of that
appreciate it.
is training. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for firing up. Hey,
yeah.
I have to ask you this as the co-author of Sex at Dawn. How come there's no sex chapter in this book?
And the
It,
walk, born to walk.
yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Isn't
we couldn't
sex
all.
an excellent source of
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, hold up the book there.
born to walk. Yeah,
Born to
uh,
enjoy yourself. Yeah.
yeah, born to
I
enjoy
mean,
yourself.
would you list sex as an important potential
Huge,
exercise?
huge,
Yeah.
huge. Well, not just as an exercise, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's like, in my mind. I mean, I've been married 35 years, been with my wife almost 38 years now. And sex is the best it's ever been. It's great. It's important. It's integral. If we're not, on it for too many days in a row, we sort of lose, a little bit of the spark. So it's a really important part of our relationship. Now, does it have to be for couples who have been married as long as we have? Maybe not. But in our case, it's really important, and it's fun, and you could talk about the hormonal, the oxytocin and all of the serotonin and the dopamine and all of the things that are created as part of that. I think it's really important for a lot of people, and I think it's sad that so many people tend to assume that it wanes, it dies, it stops being important at some point.
Yeah. Again, though, I think that's an American thing.
Yeah.
Like in Spain and France, they're, just walking down the street, you see women in their 70s and beyond who you can tell they feel beautiful.
Yeah.
They feel like they're part of the erotic energy of life.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if it's true, but it seems to me that libido must have the same root as life in Latin.
Yeah. I mean, in Chinese medicine, there's a strong connection there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about sex, we're not necessarily talking about intercourse. We're talking about allowing erotic energy to flow through one's
Yeah.
being, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, which brings me into another question I wanted, or another issue I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on, which is aging gracefully. Because again, I feel like in so many ways in America we're swimming against the stream, trying to
Mhm.
do things properly, eat properly. Well, most of the food that's available is horrible, right?
Yeah.
Move. It's most communities. It's hard to move without going to a gym and getting on a treadmill and watching CNN or whatever. Like, um, and aging gracefully. I feel like we live in this society that tells us that there is no good aging process. Like
Yeah.
aging is all about decrepitude and taking medications and going to the doctor 5 times a week. Um, so, what do you see as far as aging gracefully? What do you think the principles of that are?
Well, I mean, it's enjoying um, good, robust health. It's being pain-free. It's having a youthful attitude, no matter what age you are, or no matter what age you are showing.
Hmm.
And I would almost argue that that's probably the single greatest thing in my life, is as I try to think like I still feel like I'm 32 years old. And then I look in the mirror and like, Jesus, I guess not exactly, but okay.
Yeah,
But I try to act and move and
yeah.
think like I'm in my 30s. And I look back, I'll be 72 in 2 months. And I look back in my 50s and I think when I was in my 50s, I thought, oh shit, I'm starting to get old and I'm starting to get. Now I look at some of photographs of myself in my 50s. I'm like, Jesus, I looked good in my 50s. And at that time, I thought I looked like I was on the decline.
Hmm.
So some of this is a perpetual self-image that we have that continues to adjust as we get older. It's the dermatology industry is huge with all of the Botox and the fillers and the facelifts, and then you look at all of the um, creams and potions and lotions and pills that people take, uh, and yet everybody's still going to get older. So aging gracefully as opposed to anti-aging, and I think that's the
Hmm.
that's the big thing. There's this anti-aging movement, and the assumption is that aging is associated with the onset of death. Aging is senescence. Aging is
Hmm.
whatever. When in fact, aging in another context is just adding years. It's just getting older, and I feel certainly wiser than I've ever been. I certainly feel more content than I've ever been. And back to the what happens when you die or if you die. I mean, I every morning I wake up and first thing I think is, oh my God, there's no school today. So I love and
You
and
still
and then
thinking that, huh?
I do. I love that. And then as I go about the morning, I think to myself, if today's the day that I die, I'm pretty content with everything I've done. I mean, I feel good about everything I've done. I feel like I've made a contribution. I feel like I've made an impact on people's lives. And so there's a good feeling about that. As one gets older, you become more comfortable with the past and the things that, without judging the negative aspects of what you've done or whatever. So yeah, I think the aging grace, even the term aging gracefully is sort of like judgmental a little bit. It's right.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know. It's just aging. We all do it, and I don't know what to say beyond that. I have to laugh at some of the protocols and modalities I see people engaging in you know, to look a little bit better, but
Yeah.
not really own up to it on the inside.
I've often a metaphor that comes to me when I think about these issues is it feels like there's a presumption that we're in a lake and we can swim in any direction we want. Whereas
Yeah.
the reality, as I see it, is we're in a river and we're going downstream. And you can turn around and try to swim upstream if you want, which would be anti-aging, right? Which would be the
Yeah.
Botox and the surgeries and all this stuff. But you're still going to be swept downstream. Time
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
passes. You're still aging. And the problem is there are rocks in this river. And so you're going to be much better off if you're facing downstream. So there's the sense of
Yeah.
acceptance. Okay, I'm going downstream, but if I'm facing downstream, I can avoid the rocks and the
Yeah.
the pitfalls and the snags. Um, and so this denial, whether it's the guy with his supplements or it's the surgeries or the interventions or the very strict dietary stuff, it just seems so counterproductive to me. So I'm so happy that you, as a figurehead in this world, have you're clearly facing downstream and have a
I
much
got my
more.
feet out front
You
though.
got your feet out, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, much better. um I've never experienced, is the runner's high real? Does that actually exist, or is this like the Yeti? The
No,
boat.
it's really interesting that you say that because people have talked about that obviously since the 70s, the runner's high. The runner's high, which is biochemically, it's the release of endorphins. Endorphins are the body's natural painkillers. So the runner's high is a morphine-like high, not it's morphine-like. It's not the same as morphine, but and it's what's ironic to me is that it's a stress hormone. It's a life or death hormone. It's basically a death hormone. So endorphins are what the zebra, like when you watch some of these brutal nature things, when the zebra is
Yeah,
being eaten alive by the lion for 20 minutes before he dies, endorphins, right? It's
right.
basically a slightly more peaceful death. So when we face these life or death situations and we release endorphins, that's our natural adaptation to either surviving or trying to survive in the face of a life or death situation. So for runners to go out and seek that every time they head out the door isn't indicative of a benefit. It's sort of indicative of having gone and done too much too
Mm,
often.
I
And
see.
and then, getting this reprieve, this death reprieve from these endorphins that now become because you can now choose to access them by doing hard work and struggling and suffering every day. You can bring this on, but so that's the runner's high, and it's not necessarily a good thing. It's just a thing.
Do you think is
Does that
that?
make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I actually wrote about that in my second book. I found an account from a British explorer in Africa who had been attacked by a lion and survived. And he described this feeling of being in a dream state and totally relaxed and just like, oh, okay, this is how I die. And it was
Yeah.
clearly an endorphin induced
Yes.
trance kind of. um I was going to ask if this this the same mechanism that happens with extreme cold exposure or sweat lodge with extreme heat?
Could be. Could well
Yeah.
be. There's no reason that it wouldn't be. It's a biochemical reaction to a stress that is beyond what the body is um, trained to handle on a regular basis. Now, again, the
Right.
fact that you could do this running every day. I mean, I will tell you that my running career ended as a result of endorphins, as a result of the runner's high. Here's how it ended. I was training for the New York Marathon. And I was in the peak condition of my life. I did in 5 days, I did a 20-mile run every day for 5 days, each one faster than the previous one. And each one fueled by the endorphin rush of the previous one until on the fifth one. And then I went to a party that night and I danced and I screwed my hip up, and that was the end of my career.
You screwed your
So
hip up dancing?
I wasn't a bad dancer. It's not about that. It's just that when you're a runner and all you're doing is
Yeah.
this, and then you
Yeah.
start dancing, you do this.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow. You
yeah,
cha-cha-cha'd yourself to death there pretty much.
pretty much, pretty much.
Well, that's fantastic, man. I'm really glad you danced your way out of your extreme running career and into
Whatever it
something.
takes. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
every door that shuts, another one opens. And
yeah,
this is the story of my life, and I wouldn't change a thing.
that's fantastic. You know, I spent some time with the Tarahumara in Mexico back in 89 or 88 when I was traveling down there. And I I didn't run. I walked back
Yeah.
and hung out with him, and then I walked back to town. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting book, Born to Run. I enjoyed it, even though I'm no runner. I never bought any five finger shoes or anything like that. I've never enjoyed running, and I drew from it quite a bit when I was writing Civilized to Death because the whole sort of Nike story seemed emblematic of a lot of other problems that I was trying to explain in terms of civilized approach to life. Um, and reading your book, it was interesting. I felt like you had a similar kind of relationship where with that book, um, where there were aspects of it that you correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed that there were aspects of it that you agreed with and admired, and then other aspects that you felt were more sort of unfortunate. But I never felt like Chris McDougall was advocating running. He was more sort of telling the story of how it came to be, right?
He's a great storyteller, and he does a fabulous job. And I think he wove a compelling narrative, as we would say, with this idea that, first of all, that humans were persistence hunters, and that's how we
Mm,
came to be apex predators, top of the food chain with large brains, because we were able to track large beasts down with lots of protein and fat. We could outlast them because of our cooling systems, our sweat glands, and that because of our upright bipedal nature, we could change direction. We could do all these things. But the notion of the persistence hunter I think it got misconstrued. I mean, we didn't chase antelopes for 2.5 hours. It's running 7-minute miles with spears in our hands.
right.
Our ancestors were very good at tracking and sniffing and stopping and running and hiding and crouching and tracking and organizing and surrounding, and so for over 2 hours you do that, and the beast has been frantically going every which way. Meanwhile, you tire the animal so much that you can get close and jab a spear in him. That's persistence hunting. So the fact that we are able to walk, we're actually born to walk. That much we know. Because of our structure, because of the bipedal nature, 2 feet on the ground, not four, because of the elongated big toe, not an opposing toe that sticks way out, but elongated big toe, because of the longer Achilles tendon, because of the shoulder girth and the articulation of a shoulder to be able to wield a weapon. All of these things enabled us to become persistence hunters. But we were born to walk. We were born to be able to run from all the walking we did, lots every day, and the occasional sprinting, like all out sprinting for your life, like run away, that thing's going to kill us. And they combined the two of those, and the guys could go out and hunt once a week, once every 4 days. But do you think for a minute that those guys on the day after a kill were like get around and go, "Hey, dude, we should go out for like a 10 miler just to stay in shape"? No, that was totally antithetical to health. So
Yeah.
this it was an interesting theory, girded somewhat by Daniel Lieberman's work on human anatomy and foot strength,
Mm.
but it really doesn't bear out in the overall context of energy conservation or any of the things that a species looking to survive for 2 million years would have engaged in successfully for any length of time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm always very suspicious of any of these evolutionary theories that posit humans as this dominant, fierce, heroic, they're very
Yeah,
self-congratulatory in a weird way. The whole
yeah.
man the hunter, um yeah, it's
Anthropology is an interesting field of study because they can say, all right, we found this vertebrae, and from this we can craft a narrative of how old this person was,
yeah.
when they lived, what that day was like, they died. And again, it's all storytelling. And
And
humans
there's
are loved it to be told stories,
yeah, and there's
you know.
scratches on the
Yeah.
vertebrae that suggest
Yeah.
cannibalism, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I marvel at this, how they recreate, a colorful dinosaur from 98 million years ago based on a line in a rock or
Yeah,
something. But
yeah. Listen, Mark, I appreciate this and I want to respect your time. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you about this. And I hope, is the book available
oh
yet
yeah,
or it's
yeah,
out?
books
It's
out.
out.
Yeah, it's out.
Okay.
Available at booksellers everywhere. Born to Walk.
All right, cool. Born to Rock, not Born to Rock.
Born to
That's the
Rock.
sequel.
That's my next one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm writing it. I'm writing it with Jack Black.
exactly. All
Yeah.
right, cool. Hey, thank you very much. I
All right, Chris.
really
Take care.
appreciate this.
Yeah. Yeah.